Okay, let's dive in. So you've got an artist, right? They've picked a subject. It could be anything, a person, a landscape, maybe even just a feeling.
Hmm.
But the really big question, the thing that shapes what you actually see at the end is, well, how do they decide to show it to you, to the viewer?
That's it. That's the crucial choice, isn't it? The
Mhm.
subject. That's just the starting block.
Yeah.
How they present it. That's not just random. It's a really deliberate decision.
Mhm.
Comes down to their skills, the art they've looked at, their own viewpoint, maybe even just how they're feeling that day.
Right. It's like cooking, not just the ingredients, but how you chop them, how you cook them, how you plate them up. It all matters.
Exactly.
So our mission today for this deep dive is really to unpack all these different ways artists go about presenting their subjects. We'll pull out the key ideas, the characteristics, and look at some examples from the sources you've shared.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
And, well, maybe the most basic way, the most fundamental approach that artists can take is just to show something, pretty much exactly as it looks in the real world.
Okay, so that leads us straight into naturalism.
Mm.
This is all about showing realistic things, realistic objects, but in a setting that feels, well, natural,
Yeah.
believable.
Yeah, and historically, it really came into its own in the 19th century. It was partly a reaction against the more stylized, sort of idealized art of Romanticism that came before.
Ah, okay. Pushing back.
Exactly. But that urge, that impulse to
Mhm.
show things realistically, that's been around for ages. You can trace it way back, even to the Renaissance.
So what's the key thing with naturalism? What defines it?
It's that intense focus on precise detail. Really intense. The goal is to show things exactly as they are, like photographically almost.
Our sources mention Haymaking by Jules Bastien Lepage as a good
Well,
example.
a perfect example.
You look at that painting and you really feel like you could step right into that field, don't you? You see every bit of straw, the way the clothes hang. It's just rendered with incredible accuracy.
That fidelity is key. Now, building on that, or maybe alongside it, you have the wider movement of realism.
Right. Similar but different.
Yeah, slightly different focus. While naturalism is maybe more about the look, the realistic depiction, realism is often more concerned with representing the subject matter, truthfully, meaning deliberately avoiding anything that feels, fake, artificial.
Mhm.
No speculative stuff, no angels or monsters, unless that's part of the truth being told, perhaps psychologically.
Yeah.
Realism often tackles the everyday, the mundane stuff, sometimes even the ugly side of life or the difficult parts.
Yeah.
And it does it without trying to pretty it up or stylize it.
So it can be quite unflinching.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's an approach that keeps popping up throughout art history because, well, that desire to reflect the world honestly without the sugarcoating, it's powerful.
The source pointed to Gustave Courbet's The Stonebreakers.
Classic realism. It just shows this back-breaking labor with total directness. There's no attempt to make it heroic or romantic.
Just the hard reality of the work.
Exactly that.
Okay, so naturalism and realism. They really ground the art in the world we can see. They aim to show you life, kind of, unfiltered, asking you to see the world as it is.
Right. But what if the artist wants to show you something you can't easily see? What about an emotion or an idea or some kind of hidden meaning?
Ah, now we're moving beyond just the surface.
Precisely. And that's where we get into the really fascinating areas of abstraction and symbolism.
Let's start with abstraction. This sounds like a big shift from showing things realistically.
It is. It's a definite departure. It's driven much more by the artist's inner world, their intuition. There's a real sense of freedom there.
So the goal isn't to make a perfect copy of something.
Not at all. The goal is more about using their imagination to kind of translate internal stuff, feelings, thoughts,
Mhm.
even just sensations, onto the canvas,
Well,
using the language of art itself, color, line, shape, texture. For the viewer, the connection isn't about recognizing, say, a tree. It's about engaging with that abstract language and letting it spark something in you.
okay, so it's less about representation, more about evocation. And abstraction isn't just one thing, is it? The source mentioned different types.
That's right. It takes various forms. One is distortion.
Distortion, like warping things.
Exactly. The artist deliberately changes the shape or the usual look of something familiar. Why? To express a particular idea or feeling. The source mentioned Henrietta Harris's work.
Right, where faces might be sort of shifted or smudged.
Yes, subtly altered. It creates this maybe sense of unease or introspection. You recognize it, but it feels off in a way that makes you think or feel something specific.
I see. Okay, what else?
Then there's elongation, which is pretty much what it sounds like.
Stretching things out.
Lengthening or extending the subject. Think of High Aspirations by Ernie Barnes.
Oh, yeah. The figures are really stretched upwards.
And that visual stretching directly communicates that feeling of striving, of reaching that the title suggests. It's a visual metaphor made literal.
Makes sense. And then there's a more intense one, Mangling.
Yes. This involves depicting the subject as if it's been cut, torn, or, well, mutilated. It sounds harsh, and it often looks harsh.
Like Picasso's Weeping Woman.
A prime example. He uses that fragmentation, that visual violence, to convey the absolute depth of psychological pain and grief. It's not subtle.
Definitely not. And Picasso, of course, brings us to Cubism.
Indeed, which is another really revolutionary form of abstraction.
This is where things get broken down into geometric shapes, cones, cubes.
Cylinders, yeah.
Yeah. Instead of trying to render things organically as they appear to the eye from one viewpoint, the source mentioned his factory, Horta de Ebo.
So what was the goal with Cubism? Why break everything up?
Well, Cubism fundamentally challenged the traditional way of seeing, that single-point perspective we'd had since the Renaissance.
Not so.
It tries to show you multiple viewpoints of an object at the same time, all within the one picture. So it's less about what that factory looks like if you stand in one spot.
And more about understanding its structure, its form, its presence in space from different angles. Exactly. It's trying to give you a more complete, conceptual understanding of the object, not just a snapshot. Groundbreaking stuff.
Absolutely. Okay, so that's abstraction in its various forms. What about symbolism? How does that fit in?
Symbolism is a bit different. Here, the subject itself, what's being depicted, might look fairly realistic or maybe stylized, but it carries a hidden meaning, a meaning beyond just what you literally see.
So the image stands for something else.
Precisely. And figuring out that something else often requires a bit more work from the viewer. You might need to become a bit of an investigator.
How do you mean?
Well, to really get the deeper meaning, you often need to look into the artist's background, maybe their personal life or the cultural symbols that were common at the time they were working.
So the clues aren't always right there on the canvas.
Not always obvious, no. Artists use symbols that can be widely understood, like a dove for peace, or sometimes symbols that are intensely personal, known only to them or their circle.
The source used the Mona Lisa as an example here, which is interesting. It's a portrait, but...
But it's so much more than just a portrait of a woman, isn't it? To really appreciate it, understanding Da Vinci, the Renaissance context, his scientific interests, his artistic theories, it all adds layers of meaning. It's not just who she is, but what she might represent, or the artistic problems Da Vinci was exploring through her.
Ah, okay. So the symbolism isn't necessarily a hidden object, but the whole work can function symbolically when you understand the context.
Yes, exactly. So unlike those realistic methods trying to show you the visible world.
Abstraction and symbolism are actively asking you to look past the surface.
Right, to engage with ideas, with emotions, maybe with hidden codes or deeper meanings. They really invite interpretation.
Which leads us nicely into thinking about how artists sometimes group together, adopting specific styles or philosophies to get their ideas across these big movements in art history.
Yeah, and these movements often have very distinct ways of presenting subjects. Take Fauvism, for example.
Fauvism, wild beasts, right? What's the key characteristic?
Instantly recognizable. It's all about incredibly strong color, often really non-naturalistic color, and this very energetic, fierce brushwork.
So not trying to paint a tree green if they don't feel like it.
Not at all. Artists like Henri Matisse, André Derain, they weren't using color to describe reality. They used it to express feeling, pure emotion, and to create this huge visual impact.
Bold colors.
Often straight out of the tube, applied with these really vigorous strokes. It's about direct, emotional power through color and simplified form.
Okay, quite visceral. What came next, or around the same time?
Well, emerging from this sort of disillusionment after World War I, you get Dadaism.
Dada. That always sounds playful, but also kind of chaotic.
It was both. It wasn't so much a unified style, more like a protest. A playful, often nonsensical, experimental protest movement.
Protesting what?
Basically, logic, reason, tradition, the establishment. Everything they felt had led to the catastrophe of the war. It was a deliberate revolt against artistic conventions.
How did that look in practice?
Often quite strange. Think of Marcel Duchamp's fountain.
The urinal.
The sign urinal, yes. A classic Dada gesture. It wasn't about craftsmanship. It was about challenging the very definition of art. What is art? Who decides? It was meant to shock, to provoke, to make people question everything.
Definitely provocative. Okay, what else was bubbling up?
Meanwhile, over in Italy, around the same time as Cubism was developing, you had Futurism.
Futurism sounds like it's looking ahead.
Exactly. This movement was completely obsessed with the modern world, with dynamism, speed, machines, technology.
Capturing the energy of the 20th century.
That was the goal. They wanted to convey the mechanical energy, the noise, the excitement of modern life.
Hmm.
The source actually mentions futuristic art from NASA, which, okay, is much later.
Right.
But it captures that same spirit, that energy, the focus on technology, moving forward, embracing the future. Futurist paintings often try to show things in motion, using fragmented forms to suggest speed and force.
Interesting. A very different vibe from Dada.
Very different. Then, moving into the 1920s, mainly in Paris, you get Surrealism.
Surrealism. This is the subconscious stuff, right? Dreams.
Yes, diving deep into the subconscious mind. It was heavily influenced by Sigmund Freud's ideas on psychology.
Exploring things we're not normally aware of.
Precisely. Dreams, yes, but also irrational fears, desires, the darker, sometimes violent or unsettling parts of the psyche,
How did they show that visually?
often through bizarre juxtapositions,
Uh,
putting objects or ideas together that just don't belong in the rational world. Think melting clocks or impossible landscapes. The idea was to unlock deeper truths or feelings that lie beneath our conscious, rational thoughts.
okay, tapping into something hidden. And finally, the source mentions Expressionism.
Right. Expressionism. This actually started a bit earlier, mainly in Germany, around 1900 up to 1910 or so.
And its focus was,
Intense emotion, really raw, often difficult emotions. Pathos, anxiety, morbidity, a sense of chaos.
sounds quite heavy.
It often was. Expressionists generally felt that modern society was deeply flawed, maybe spiritually empty. They believed some kind of spiritual rebirth was necessary.
And the art reflected that urgency.
Absolutely. The distorted figures, the harsh, sometimes clashing colors you see in works like The Night by Max Beckmann,
Yeah.
they aren't just stylistic choices for the sake of it. They're visual manifestations of that internal turmoil, that anxiety, and that critique of the society around them.
Wow. So each of these movements really had its own powerful reason for being, its own way of using style and ideas to react to the world.
Definitely. A distinct combination of philosophy and visual approach to send a specific message about how they saw things, how they experienced the world.
So just recap quickly. We've gone from artists trying to show the world pretty much as it looks, naturalism and realism, to artists exploring inner feelings or hidden meanings through abstraction and symbolism.
Right.
And then looking at how whole groups of artists develop specific styles and philosophies in movements like Fauvism, Dadaism, Futurism, Surrealism, and Expressionism.
That covers the main approaches outlined. And, understanding these different methods, it really gives you a powerful set of tools when you encounter a piece of art. It shifts your whole perspective. You move beyond just asking, okay, what is that a picture of?
And start asking.
How is the artist choosing to show this to me? And maybe, why this way? Why not another way? You start to see the intention, the deliberate decisions behind it all.
Yeah, it makes viewing art much more active, doesn't it? Not just passively receiving an image, but engaging with the artist's choices.
Exactly, as a dialogue.
And it makes you think. Considering that an artist's own background, their preferences, their beliefs, maybe even just their mood that day, can really influence which method they lean towards. What does that initial choice of presentation, realistic, abstract, symbolic, expressionistic, what does that choice itself tell you, even before you fully decode the artwork?
That's a great question. That choice alone is probably the very first layer of meaning you can start to uncover, isn't it? It tells you something about the artist or the message they want to prioritize right from the outset.